Hello everybody, Abbott's brother here, back at last. And today we're going to look at the performance of Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 on some old PCs. Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 was developed and published by CI Games. It was released on April 25th, 2017. It uses CryEngine and the DirectX 11 API. And you can see the minimum and recommended specs on screen here. One thing to note is it says minimum 2 gigabytes VRAM, but I think it really needs 3 at minimum. But we'll see. First test system is the A770K with the FirePro W5100. And we are at 1080p low here. But as expected, or at least my expectations, for this system is not great, just because Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 is a very old school CryEngine game. You can see we're hovering mid-30s here. It's an old school CryEngine game, which means it's very single-threaded focused. Now obviously the A770K is pretty slow CPU, so it's looking fairly well loaded here, but that's the reason we're getting some stutters and dips in the frame time, blips in the frame time on the graph there, because, you know, this is kind of a semi-sandbox game. It's basically, instead of one massive world, you get a whole bunch of smaller sandboxes, which by themselves are of a decent size. But driving through the world like this, you got to load the new stuff in. And that's a bit of a load on the CPU there to do that. The W5100 is up to the task, but even at 1080p low, as you can see, we're using about 3.8, 3.9 gigs of VRAM. So I don't know where that 2 gigabyte VRAM minimum comes from, because it's we will be testing a 3 gig card in a minute, but it really seems like 4 gigs is the way to go with this one. So yeah, some people, there's an argument. I just said CryEngine in the intro, but there's actually an argument about whether it's CryEngine 3 or CryEngine 4. The version is not clear. The general conclusions, oh, there he is, seem to be that it is a highly developed version of CryEngine 3, running in a 64-bit framework. And yeah, so that dipped to 23 FPS there. I mean, put a 30 FPS lock on it, and probably going to do much better here, just because it's not going to be jumping all over the place. So 30 FPS, it looks like, with this combo. Oh yeah, and look at that, we're almost up to 4 gigs of VRAM. Yeah. Only under 8 gigs of RAM, though. So, and we are running Windows now. And I can talk about that in a minute after we get through this next one. System 2, we're with an i5 4690K overclocked to 4.4 gigahertz and the GTX 780, which has only 3 gigs of VRAM. And we will be at the same settings here, 1080p low, and you can see the advanced stuff here. The only thing I turned off is motion blur. Excuse me. And we are moved right away to maxing out the VRAM. So at 3049 megabytes, we're gonna get a few stutters here and there, I think. The RAM usage isn't a lot higher than on the W5100 system. See, if it was running out of VRAM, it would have loaded up the RAM, but I'm not really seeing that. Maybe by 100 meg, maybe 250 megabytes, maybe spill over into RAM. Not much, though. Ironically, the 4690K, I had to back the overclock off a bit because I had this paired with an R9 280X, and I was able to get a 4.5 gigahertz overclock on the CPU, but when I paired it with a GTX 780 and NVIDIA, it kept crashing, so I had to back the overclock off a little bit. But yeah, I'm running Windows now on all my benchmarking systems, and I understand I'm losing a bit of the novelty with some of this stuff, but things kept breaking on me using the Linux systems. I was running Arch Linux, which I get is a more advanced system, but you know, this is kind of a hobby, a part-time thing. I want to be able to sit down and basically record all my footage in like 3 hours and then spend some time editing together and getting it up. I don't want to spend hours troubleshooting problems that I shouldn't be having. And there were a number of minor annoyances while running Linux that I dealt with, but the thing that really sold it for me was that an update, a kernel update, basically broke Vega undervolting. And I can't test a blower Vega without undervolting it. Just won't happen. So that was it, really. I mean, the seeds were sown when Starfield didn't work at all on the Intel Arc A770, but pretty impressive performance from the 780 here. But you can see we are up to 8.5 gigs of RAM used, so there is some VRAM spillover here. I'd estimate about a gig extra of RAM has been used.
We need a medic over here. We've got a casualty.
Good performance, but you're going to stutter a little bit. Let's go to the FX-8320e and the GTX 1060. This is a 6GB 1060. And to me, we're going to be testing RX 480 in a minute. We're at 1080p medium here. To me, the RX 480 and GTX 1060 are fundamentally the same in performance. They take different paths to get there. The RX 480 has 2 extra gigs of VRAM, but for performance, they're fundamentally the same. So if they're not performing within 5 FPS of each other, you can put that down to the FX-8320e, bottlenecking it. And you can see we got a little bottleneck here, but fact of the matter is, if you're going to be using an old AMD CPU like the FX series, NVIDIA's Windows driver is a lot better for weaker CPUs. The render path, or whatever it is much more optimized for low single-core performance CPUs. So if you're getting an old FX chip, you definitely want to get an NVIDIA GPU. That's why it's paired up this way. And what surprises me is that for a chip, for a game that is very single-core focused, it seems to be spreading the load around quite well here. And this is a single-fan GTX 1060. I wanted the 6 gig model. This was the cheapest one out there, and unfortunately, that means even with a repaste, it hits its thermal limit pretty fast, and then it's going to throttle. Oh, but... oh, get out of here. But even with the FX chip's obvious limitations, I mean, 60 to 80 FPS, I think we're going to dip under 60 here, if I can trigger the bullet cam. Let's see what we get. Yeah, we didn't trigger it that time. That was more of a shoulder shot than anything else. There we go. Let's see what we get. Yeah, 59. No, very good performance from the FX-8320e. I will say, if you're going to go for an old AMD chip like an FX chip, definitely do look at going for the 8-core FX chips. They're just much more viable. Oh wow, we just jumped to 94% utilization right there. That's as it's loading in all the distance stuff. Yeah, you definitely want to get the most out of this, out of the AM3 platform. You need the 8-core, that's for sure. Pretty good for 1080p medium. How will it do with 1440p? Let's crank it up. And you can see here we're at 1440p low. So that was 1080p medium. We're now at 1440p low. GTX 1060 can do some basic 1440p. At least back in the day it could. But it doesn't look like we're going to be able to hold 60 FPS. Now, maybe that's going to be okay. It's really, really close. But since we're pushing the resolution here, we're not really CPU bottlenecked at all here. Every time I get a benchmark like this with the FX-8320e, I am just very impressed that it holds up so well. And I know the voltage looks like it's low. They're like, people are probably going to say, oh, it's only 4.2 gigahertz. You could overclock it more. You're only pulling 1.3 volts. It's like, I'm a little confused on the volts on the FX-8320e because I am actually running a voltage offset in the BIOS. So I am running 0.13 volt positive offset in the BIOS to get my 4.2 gigahertz overclock. So is that being included in the 1.3 volts we're seeing, or is it on top of that? Because if it's on top of that, that means I'm actually running about 1.45 volts. I honestly don't know if it's actually reporting it or if it's just... if it's not included, then yeah, I obviously do have quite a bit of additional overhead. I could push this harder. But if I'm just getting the base reading and then the offset is being applied on top of what we're seeing, then yeah. Oh, I missed. Come on. Got him. The E-Series FX chips were tuned for power saving, not performance. And the FX-8320e, if I don't overclock it, it'll run about 3.5 gigahertz. And it'll do a single core turbo to 4 gigahertz, but not for long. So, mid-50s to 70, it looks like. Pretty good at 1440p. Let's see how the RX 480 does when paired with the 4790. And we'll start out with the same settings as we did for the GTX 1060, 1080p medium. RX 480 just turned 10 years old the other day. But this is getting into, wow. We're getting really good frame rate here. We're well ahead of GTX 1060. That's got to be the FX chip holding it back, but it didn't look like the 1060 was bottlenecked all that hard. Getting a few more stutters, though, I think. But this is the thing that I've been contemplating for a while. I might do a talking head video about it or something. You know, if you want to play games, there are so many games out there you can play that don't have ray tracing, that don't need a supercomputer to play them. And you got a 4790 and an RX 480, you can play Sniper Ghost Warrior 3. Just lock it to 60 FPS and off you go. I actually 100%ed this game a week ago or so. I got all the achievements. And it was a fun time. The sandbox is really well designed. There's lots of little places to go and things to find. The loot's a little disappointing. The sniping is top tier, though. And my silencer is almost worn out. But we're definitely getting better frames than the GTX 1060. But I'm not holding that against the 1060, like I said, because it's paired with the FX chip. And this Sapphire card is clocked pretty high for our RX 480. Wow, I shot him through the tree. One thing when I'm setting up the overlay here, there is no total board power readout for the RX 480. So I'm just using the core power metric on the overlay. So it is drawing quite a bit of power. So 1080p between 80 and 100 FPS. Now let's go to 1440p, low settings. And it looks like we are... This is crazy good for an RX 480. And this is still, at the time, running the latest driver, which is, I think it was 26.5 something. Whereas the GTX 1060 is no longer receiving driver updates. A rare win for AMD there. Very surprising. One thing that can help performance with Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 is the drive that it's installed on. I've installed it on a fast hard drive, and it runs great. And we dipped under 60. Here it's installed on a Patriot Burst Elite SSD. But you need something with really good read times. Otherwise, you are going to get some stutters here. Read times and good single-threaded performance. And the 4790 is well up to this task. But you can see at 1440p low, we're using about 5 gigs of VRAM here. So definitely probably not something you want to attempt with a 4 gig RX 480. I mean, you'll do it. You can do it, but it's going to overflow into the RAM again. I keep hoping I'll trigger the bullet cam, which you can turn off, by the way. If you find that super annoying, that is a setting in the menu that you can turn off the bullet cam, but it triggers... Here we go. 52, dip to 52. 53. That whole process of doing the bullet cam really makes it dip as it's quickly loading in all the assets. Very impressive RX 480 at 1440p low. But now let's get to the heavyweights. Let's get to the i7 5930K and the Vega 64. And Vega 64, we were at 1440p medium. So same resolution as what we just finished with, but now we're cranking the settings to medium. And that 1440p medium, as a generalization, seems to be where Vega is most comfortable in games up to, I want to say, about 2019. And 1440p medium, we're using 5.5 gigs of VRAM. Getting quite a few stutters here, though. That's got to be down to the 5930K. Vega's definitely loaded, though. I mean, we're 96, 98% utilization, but the Vega's drawing about 250 watts. So that is pretty heavily loaded for Vega. Yep. And the HBM is right at the peak of what I'm willing to allow, so it's right at 85C. I hope I don't have to repaste it again. So really good frame rate through here. We're hitting 120 even a bit. Could probably turn the settings up a little more if you felt so inclined. If you pair this with something like a Ryzen 5 5500, you're definitely going to get probably smoother performance in this game. I don't want to say better, but I would definitely say smoother. Okay, that fixes my silencer. Let's see what we get here. Yeah, we got a little CPU bottleneck here for sure. As you can see, Vega's utilization dropped there for a bit. Got to set the elevation. Now let's get the zoom. What do we got? A little bit of a dip there in utilization, not too bad. It's funny, I would have expected a 5930K to perform better than the 4790. Since it's basically, it's Haswell E, so it's pretty much the same architecture, just with bigger cache and more cores. And I'm sure people are like, there's other things doing, it does too. Alright, so it dipped a little bit there once we got to the long range. But most of the time it's pretty impressive. But now let's try it at 4K low. This is going to push it hard. 4K low. 4K, we are using over 6 gigs of VRAM. I'm watching the green readout on the overlay. That's the Western Digital Green SSD that the system is installed on. And I'm not seeing a correlation between the stutters and read times. So it's got to be the CPU. I think Vega is performing really well here, but it's just not enough to get 60 FPS at 4K. Probably could do 60 FPS at 3440 by 1440 low. But 4K low, it's just not there. And the fan is really cranked up right now. It is dumping a lot of heat out the back of the PC. See, now we're in the country, we're doing a little bit better here. I mean, like in the countryside. Let's see what it does when we get the long draw distance. Stays fully utilized. Can't quite get to a... It gets to 60 sometimes, but it's not common. Yeah, that was 47 I saw there. It's a decent performance from Vega, but honestly, 4K 60 is a little overmatched. Vega's a little overmatched at 4K here. Is it playable? Yeah, I could play it like this, but definitely not something to prioritize there. However, Ryzen 5 5500 and Intel Arc A770 now. And as you can see here, we're at 1440p medium, just like with Vega. As I said earlier, Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 is focused on single core speed. And Intel Arc is famous for having some CPU bottlenecks in the driver. So we're just going to have to see how this shakes out. And you can see in the overlay, certain cores of the 5500 are pegged really high. We've got a bunch of stutters happening, and the A770 utilization is dropped under 50%. So I'd say Intel Arc's CPU bottleneck is in full force here. Still not fully utilized. We're at 92 FPS, and it's not fully utilized. See, this is where you're like, oh, it's about the same performance as the Vega. Yes, but the Arc has a lot more to give. It's just not giving it. This is one of the things that messed Arc up as an architecture. It's a lot better than it's been, at least the A series is. I know Intel got a lot of goodwill back when they came out with the B580, and it was a lot better than the A series. A series has gotten a lot better too. But there are still some things where it just doesn't quite, not quite unleash the way it should be. You can see we just dropped into the 50s there for a brief second, and now we're up to 136. It's like it's all over the place. Can I get the bullet cam? Yes. What happens with the bullet cam? 57. Whoa, 43. Dipped to 43. And at 1440p, I think we're using, more VRAM than Radeon as well. I told you. I've said before, Intel uses between 400 to 600 more megabytes of VRAM than Radeon. And using just about 6 gigs of VRAM here. At 1440p, not at 4K, at 1440p. Well, that's disappointing from Intel Arc, though not entirely unexpected. Let's see how it goes at 4K. And 4K low, just like Vega 64. But since the Arc A770 had more capacity, more unused resources, I expect this is going to go very well. So now we're fully utilized. And can we stay above 60 FPS? I think there's a good chance. We dipped. Right there, loading in the additional assets. That could be on the CPU, but... So we're staying under 8 gigs of VRAM here. So if you have an 8 gig A750 or even 8 gig A770, you could definitely play Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 without worrying about overflowing your VRAM. Well, I think it's performing a lot better, not because it's at 99%, it just, the frame time graph seems a lot smoother here with everything loaded up. And this ASRock Phantom card is just such a champ here, keeping everything... It's just such a big contrast to the Vega, which is a blower card and super loud and runs hot. And now I've got this ASRock Phantom A770, which is like, you know, staying at 70 degrees, 73 degrees. It's just chill. Well, for 4K, the A770 certainly seems to be pulling its weight here. 1440p, the bottleneck was really exposed. Let's see if I can get the bullet cam here. Maybe we can get a... oh, he's moving. See if I can get the bullet cam, and we can see what happens. Come on. Definitely performing a lot better at 4K than 1440p. Dipped to 54 FPS right there, but this is a much better experience than that 1440p. Weird. Alright, a lot more impressive at 4K, that's for sure. So, Sniper Ghost Warrior 3, definitely focused on CPU single-threaded speed. A10 W5100, definitely going to be looking at 30 FPS lock for a smooth experience. I know the system specs said 2 gigabytes minimum VRAM, but even the GTX 780 was overflowing into the RAM, so while performance was mostly fine, expect a few stutters on that system. GTX 1060, RX 480, those are both good 1080p medium, 1440p low cards. I think you could play them at 1440p low. You'll dip under 60 when you do. RX 480 seemed like it had the edge here, but that is probably because it was paired with an i7 4790, whereas the 1060 was paired with an FX-8320e. 8320e actually performed better than I thought it would. Excuse me. But if you're going for 1440p, you want the Vega 64. And if you want 4K, the Intel Arc A770 actually came off really well at 4K, though not so good at 1440p. As with all of these tests, if you pair any of these with a better CPU, you're probably going to get a smoother experience than what you saw here. Certainly with the Arc A770, that really needs a better CPU. In this particular scenario. where you really need that single core speed, yeah, you gotta get at least, I'm gonna say, look for, if you're on AM4 and you're looking to play Sniper Ghost Warrior 3, try to get a CPU that has a turbo core, at least a 4.6 gigahertz, preferably 4.8 or even 5 gigahertz. See what you can manage. But Intel A770, you're definitely going to get an advantage from getting a faster CPU, faster turbo core on the CPU. That's all I got for you today. Hope this video was useful to you. If it was, please give it a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.